let me just offer up some thoughts, which I'm conscious I'm not a healthcare professional. I work a little bit of time in the healthcare world, so I have some insight on some of what you're discussing, but I have a feeling that some of what I might say now might cut across some of what you have covered this morning. Some of it might be complementary, and by all means, I'll try and leave enough time to have a few questions. My proposition is healthy connections. You know, that Sabina, when you so kindly invited us, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, and I feel in very esteemed company, and I feel humble in your midst. I felt the connection was this question about holism and the connections around organisations and teams and individuals. And in the lens of individuals, I often have leaders in my sights and leadership teams. So that's kind of what I'm majoring on, but I hope I don't go too far off the point, and that it helps think about some of the things you've discussed this morning. My own research, I did a doctorate about 13 years ago, and actually what prompted me was what was going on back then, really, in terms of the financial crisis. And I'm trying to remember when mid-staffs really started. Was that, how far back was that? Was that, it's even further back, isn't it? But if you think back to what was going on around that time, there was a lot going on as well, like phone hacking, which incidentally has been in the news the last couple of weeks, hasn't it? There was things like the Hillsborough inquiry, things like the Metropolitan Police problems and so on. And all of that stuff was going on in the background. And as an organisational consultant, my interest was there's something not right in the state of Denmark. What's going on, and what can organisational developers do? I used to have a slide with those things on. I've now shifted the slide because the things seem even bigger to me, really, which is things like the level of inequality. We've had COVID, which has completely changed the way a lot of people are working. Maybe less so in the health service than in other sectors, I think, but AI, who knows? And actually the one on the left, is now becoming my passion more and more, because I think all of us could be wasting our time here if that happens. And I will tell you, I worked with a group of GPs in Leeds, and they had a list of priorities. I mean, they are so busy, and it's so hard watching them. And they had climate on their list of priorities, but they just said, we can't deal with that today because we've got too much else going on. And that's what's happening everywhere, isn't it? All the time. I would hear that anywhere if I went anywhere else. So that's my start point. I mean, we could all get so. My start point was organisational wisdom. What's the contribution of people like myself, organisational development practitioners? So I started with a practice orientation. In my literature review, I got interested in the fact that there was, at that time, there was an emerging stream of literature beginning around wisdom generally. I mean, I'm not a psychologist by background, but I think it came from psychology more than anywhere else. I don't really know how phronesis has crept into the healthcare lexicon, but in the organisational world, I think it's come via psychology into management studies, probably. I think that would be where, but I've just picked off, you know, there are in my world, if you like, in the organisational literature, there are handbooks of organisational wisdom out there, and more, I think, you know, at the turn of the century, there were a handful, and now there's that many, and it's getting bigger and bigger. But I've just put up those quotes because I think they echo the holism, this kind of sense of human and social needs, moral, spiritual promptings, deep understanding and capacity for living well, to lead the good life and enable it for others. And then practical wisdom has the capacity to integrate the good, the practical, artful ways of life, ethics, pragmatics, living well, you know, and I think that's probably what we're all hoping for, is it? So that deeper needs living well. My own research was practice-based with people in my kind of community, organisational development practitioners. And basically, I got a group together. We kept meeting, discussing definitions of wisdom, what we thought it was. And then I invited them to go away and explore what they thought wisdom looked like in their context. And I'm going to cut right to the chase, which is that it produced in my work then a model or a framework of an integrated framework for wisdom, which, cut to the chase, would take the premise that there are some possible characteristics of wisdom that we could see like a stick of rock running through the individual, through the team, through the organisation, through society, and that they could be articulated as a kind of inner realm and an outer realm. So the inner ones around our consciousness, conscience and context, and I'll describe these in a minute, and an outer realm, a bit more behavioural, how we behave to each other, our compassion, our collaboration and our courage. As I look at that, and I'm sure that you could critique it, and lots of people do critique it, and I critique it myself, but I still stick with it because I think even in the words, if you unpick the words, and you might choose different words, I think it holds up reasonably well with some of the different words you might put on it. But the concept for me actually is more about the circle than it is about the words. It's about the holism, the relationships, the inner and the outer. So if you don't like my words, maybe give the circles, a bit of breathing space. I could stop there and just say, does that make sense at that point? Should I just define the words? And again, this comes from my research, but so the inner ones, the three ones, consciousness, conscience, and context. And I think some of you might come back to the question, are you being is the word normative in academic terms? Are you saying there is a single model and this is it? Well, I think I am in one way, but with room for manoeuvre, if that makes sense. So consciousness would be this sense of knowing from multiple intelligences, our intellect, cognitive, our emotional, our experiential, moral, spiritual, but also a balance of humility, that there's a limit to that knowing. So we're always present, open, listening, taking information, reflective and learning. And over lunch, we had an interesting discussion, Ashok and for having a conversation about how you prepare, for example, for surgery. How do you prepare when you're going into surgery? How do you practice? How are you grounded? What's your cognition like? What's your emotion like? What's your grounded stance? So that would be consciousness. I'll just interject here, in the management organisational literature, I think the general view would be we're pretty good on the cognitive intelligence stuff. We're getting better on the emotional intelligence stuff, but we ain't there on the moral intelligence stuff. So that I can keep interjecting with observations. Conscience, I suppose this is doing the right thing. Purpose is the common good, operating ethically with integrity. Humane values guide our choices. Personal fulfillment and fulfillment of the others is intertwined. So we're always going to have mental health difficulties unless we're looking after the whole of society. That sort of premise. Flora, you're literary. I also have an English literature background. Coleridge is my person rather than Keats. Coleridge, I was reading this morning, he has this definition of consciousness and conscience. And he says conscience is the grounding of consciousness, that it's our desire for something bigger, a bigger purpose, which then makes us more awake. But you could argue it the other way. And that's why I've got the circle, because I guess you could have them in balance. Context is my get out of jail card about, are you being too, what's the word, normative, and, you're advocating something in, because actually what's conscience, what's the right thing would depend on circumstances. So recognizing the complexity, the perspectives and so on. So attentive to what's happening, adapting, creative, flexible. So those are the inner ones. The outer ones, collaboration, compassion and courage. Collaboration, you know, valuing the wisdom that we hold together across us all, that we have our own wisdom, we have collective wisdom, maybe there's a higher wisdom that we're tapping into, but that it emerges through a listening and a dialogue, an openness. So both listening to our own wisdom, listening to others' wisdom, listening to wider wisdom. So that discipline of listening for the wisdom. The compassion, I think, probably speaks for itself, but it's the enacting of conscience, really, that, you know, kindness, generosity, fostering development and growth, knowing and valuing diverse strengths, human action, care for all by all. I mean, when I hear the stories, and I did have the pleasure of being at Birmingham, was it about 3 years ago, but listening to some of the stories about medical student education, and my niece is actually a medic, and I think, you know, I have to be honest, it doesn't feel very kind the way the world she's living in. So how is she going to be kind? I mean, she seems to half the time be suffering a great deal. So I worry about that, really. Then courage, I suppose it's the embodying wisdom, isn't it? How do you embody it? But it's always finely balanced, because, you know, how much courage to have. Not, you don't always step into the unknown, do you? But how do you balance that risk, finding the appropriate balance? So that was the original work, and I thought it might just help to sort of take it forward, and I'm just conscious of time. I've only got a few more minutes, haven't I? From my point of view, it's a nice model, and they've written about it, and I've enjoyed the work on it, but so what difference, how could I use it? And my question to myself, because I'm often being asked to facilitate things or run a leadership program or do, is where to intervene best. You know, do you intervene at the organisational level in the sense that are the functional systems wrong? So, you know, at lunchtime again, you talked about the fact that the medical students have to, is it the 5th of August or something, everything moves and everybody goes to there. But that is so difficult on people's stress levels and their personal lives and the choices. That for me is in the functional realm. That's a system, isn't it? It's designed by people, but it's a functional system, which feels to me like it might be unwise. So do you focus on that? Do you focus on the people, the team level? You know, are you a group, a team? You know, do you focus there? Do you focus on the individual? My own work increasingly is probably here leadership, because call me old-fashioned, and maybe I am, but I do think that senior leaders model and set the tone of a place. So for me, they are the point of the main leverage, but that's not to say leadership doesn't exist through the organisation. So if I just very briefly say that I've recently done a piece of work which was around developing wise leaders and what the perspective of coaching brings, because I don't know how many of your organisations offer coaching. In the NHS, it's widely available. Don't know whether it is in higher education quite so much. I don't know, do most people have access to coaching if they want it? Possibly, maybe more so in the NHS. And again, this was practice-based. This just drew on the fact that this word complexity is so strong for leaders at the moment. This is a recent book, Leadership and Virtues, but, you know, again, we're building the intellectual virtues, but it's the moral that need more attention. This one, again, in the same book was more about health, but the virtues such as wisdom, courage and compassion remained underexplored in the literature, never mind the practice. I just put up this, I mean, the coaching industry, the profession, I'm part of it, incredibly high, you know, it's a big increasing industry. I think it's a sign of the world that we're in, where people want more and more bespoke development in leadership roles. I mean, some of the critique would be the biggest spenders in it would have been financial services, just in advance of the financial crisis. So, you know, back to the Bill's question about what difference does any of it make? You know, is it focusing on the right things? The piece of research we did was this question, did it with the European Mentoring and Coaching Council in conjunction with Beckett. And I'm just going to cut to the chase, which is, you know, what's the evolution that needs to go on? Because coaching as a premise is probably built from a psychotherapeutic model of kind of mirroring. You tell me what you want to discuss and we'll discuss it. Sport, more performative. But is it up to the job in the nature of the problems we've got? And I think that the conclusion of that literature and that work is probably possibly not, because if we really want to go for these bigger challenges, we need to be more explicit and really working on them. So I think I'm inclined to, I'll just show you. I mean, the thing we did, for example, we started always by starting with a big picture. So if that would take us out from, you know, the top one takes us out to the earth and says, you know, how are we connected? What are we working on here for the whole, not just for me? And then we've used the wisdom wheel as well. I perhaps should just say it's a work in progress. So we've got some more research. I'll just keep going through this, but we've got some more research we're going to do. We have an article published in 2024. We're trying to develop a wisdom game on the basis that something that engages people a bit more, because in certain roles it's very difficult to use the term wisdom. I wouldn't dream of using the term phronesis in most of my private sector clients. I wouldn't dare to go there. Wisdom I might get away with. And more writing and research to come. So that's a real whistle-stop tour, but hope it's given a bit of a perspective. Hope there are some connections